Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by Madhav Datt, a fellow HBS student here at Mellon Hall, where we're currently situated. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So, why don't we dive right in? You are a first year student at the Harvard Business School, and you're doing a joint degree in the graduate school at Harvard as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience here so far, and now that you've been here for about a semester?
HBS has been incredible. I am, as you said, doing a joint degree between HBS and in engineering sciences with the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. This has been an incredible program from like a cohort and a community point of view. Uh, when I got here, so we started a little before the regular MBA program started, and so we spent a few weeks with the MSMBA cohort of 30 people, and that was incredible. Really got to know people who were very sort of like-minded along like technology, entrepreneurship, etc., and that's made for a great community to ease into HBS. Like instead of being exposed to like all the 900 people on day one, this was sort of a great gradual ramp up, which I really enjoyed. But HBS has been such an incredible community. People have been so thoughtful, friendly, accomplished, welcoming, that I've really enjoyed my time so far. And obviously, all the social activities, traveling, and all aside, I think the people are what really make this place incredibly unique.
Absolutely. And I think, HBS is such an institution where everyone is well aware of it, but they don't necessarily have a full picture of what it's like for a student, especially to live day to day. And for yourself, what has been kind of the biggest, perhaps, expectations you had initially of HBS, and now that you've been here for several months, has that expectation kind of been what you expected, or has it been kind of different from the experience you initially anticipated?
So I think one big thing that you hear before coming to business school is that MBAs are 2 year vacation, right? So you quit your job and then you enjoy life for 2 years and then you go back to work.
Yeah.
That's definitely not been the case with HBS, right? This is academically intense. There is so much going on, and there's a lot of new content. So I think that has been both surprising but also incredibly like pleasant and exciting because while coming in, I didn't really expect that. Okay, I'm going to be learning so much every day, but every single day, every single class, there's been so many new things that I've learned from both from like just class content, but also from the incredible sort of case method discussion that happens around every class and the conversations that come up and all the perspectives that different people bring in. And so that's been a very surprising but incredibly sort of valuable experience that I've enjoyed.
One of the most renowned things that Harvard Business School is known for is the case method, where students, read a case based on an organization, a situation, or an individual, typically in the real world, and kind of how that situation plays out and apply that and the lessons learned to the course itself. Um, how would you say your experience with the case methodology is? Is it as rigorous, is it as beneficial as many institutions, many organizations believe it to be?
I think so. I think, in fact, I was very surprised with sort of how effective I found the case method to be. Coming in, so for instance, for some courses like LEAD, which is our organizational behavior sort of course, I found the case method to be so incredibly powerful that it's amazing. A lot of the experiences have been very relatable to the work that I've done in the past, and it's been a great way to hear from others around what would they have done in like analogous parallel situations, what I had actually done in like some situations which were similar, how I could have done better in hindsight, and that reflection, that introspection, supported by the class discussion that the case method enables, is just simply incredible. I think it gives is at least given me this opportunity to learn so much from everybody's experiences, while also being able to really very concretely contribute to the situation, put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist, and be like, okay, this is what I would have done. And I think that's a rare opportunity that you don't really get every day. So I'm very glad we're doing that.
what would you say for yourself? You know, we have people from all stripes, all backgrounds, all industries coming into HBS to learn. Of course, we have a lot of people who come from traditionally finance backgrounds or consulting backgrounds, which of course the program is well known for, but many people do not. And so the courses ourselves for our first year, every student in the first year learns the exact same classes, the exact same cases, to kind of get everybody on the same page. For yourself, was there a class so far this semester that has been something new for you to learn? Was there a class that really kind of changed your approach or is different from your professional experiences prior?
Definitely. I think FRC has been probably the newest, which is financial. It's basically accounting.
Accounting.
Yeah, which is very new because I have never had to sort of very actively look at how accounting works or why we do things the way we do things or why things make sense, why certain controls exist, and all of that. And I think that has been both very new but also very very useful because we went far beyond like the mechanics of accounting. Right, we didn't just look at how to balance a balance sheet, but so much more around organizational incentives and how to build resilient structures, how to build a culture of integrity into organizations and things like that, which has been very, very like useful and very new perspectives on that dimension.
Absolutely. Now that we've talked a little bit about the classes that we're learning now, I would like to bring the audience to learn a little bit more about your background before, right? For those that don't know, Madhav is an extremely accomplished scholar and, of course, has had extreme success in your both professional as well as personal lives. You've won both awards, the Forbes 30 Under 30 recognition for your nonprofit work. You've been extremely successful working for Google as well as Citadel, and you've attended, of course, the prestigious IIT for your undergraduate university in India. So let's dive into a little bit about your background, especially growing up, right? What experiences made you you? Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and specifically kind of what you were really driven by, before attending, university? What was your life like before?
Uh, that's a very sort of deep question.
Yeah.
So let me sort of try and break it down to whatever I can. I was born in India. I've spent a large portion of my life growing up in the suburb of New Delhi, and my parents still live there. Um, while growing up, I think one experience that was very formative and that sort of led me down the path that I got on and led to the nonprofit and the other things that I've done was I was 8 years old and in this environmental science class. It was a mandatory thing that we all had to sit through, where our teacher was basically talking about how there's like pollution, global warming, and how the water table is dropping in the city where I was living, and something sort of went off in my head at that point. Again, I'm 8 years old, I'm young and stupid, but the question that came up was, hey, all right, so we have all these problems, solve them, right? Um, and so I think that kind of got me started along that dimension. So I convinced three friends from the same classroom to join me and like plant a couple of trees outside of our schoolyard. That was our sort of first attempt at solving climate change.
You were only about like very young. You were about 8 years
Eight
old,
years
I
old,
believe.
yes. Super super young, but then that stuck as an idea that stuck, right? So even though the action itself was very small and insignificant, the idea stuck. We kept at it over time. We went from there into like involving more people. We went from there into planting more trees. We went from there to talking to local shopkeepers to not use plastic bags. And that did not work out, but we tried. And so slowly we sort of expanded over a very long, gradual time frame, right? Over a total of like 17 years, we grew a lot. So at its peak, the organization Green the Gene was working in 62 countries. We had about 7,000 volunteers. Our projects were very, very focused on uh, using technology to build very targeted solutions for communities and environmental crises across the world. So at some point along that journey of being like, oh yeah, let's solve climate change on our own, we grew older and we realized that we can't really sort of solve that just by ourselves, right? It's a problem that's too big for any one organization, one person, or even like one country to solve. Really.
Certainly.
It's massive. So that really sort of forced us to ask, all right, how are we driving impact, right? So why is it that our work matters, or why is it that it should matter? And what we realized was that if we can't solve climate change, which we can't on our own, then we can build these very pinpoint solutions to communities who are in crisis situations today, right? So systemic change, let's say there's a community that doesn't have safe water. Systemic change might take a decade, right? Policy will pass, and then somebody will have to invest in infrastructure and so on and so forth. But those people need safe water today, right? So that is where we decided to sort of plug in. We leveraged a lot of technology, and that became a big reason why I started computer science and why I got interested in technology. Um, but we really sort of focused on those scenarios where we could sort of help people with these immediate environmental problems in the near term.
Absolutely. And then you even kept that through, I believe, through your college experience as well. And I want to dive into that a little bit. You attended IIT, which for folks, especially in Western countries, may not be aware of outside India, the IIT network is very similar perhaps to the Ivy League schools in the United States, but even more competitive perhaps. I believe the acceptance rate is like 1% or below 1%. Yeah, and you achieved that, and you attended and you studied computer science for your undergraduate university. Can you share a little bit about your experience during this kind of educational phase of your life as well? What is it like to attend an IIT school?
Yeah. IIT is a great educational experience. It is basically it is very competitive to get into, and so what that gives you once you're there is this cohort of incredibly driven, uh, passionate people who are deeply technical. It is ultimately an engineering school, and so are interested in building or learning about very different sorts of how technology interacts with the world. And that gave me exposure to a lot of different. So while I studied CS, I was around people who did a lot of other sorts of engineering, and so that gave me exposure to so many different fields of technology and really sort of got me to learn from them. The IIT that I went to is basically in the middle of nowhere. It's IIT Kharagpur. It is in the eastern parts of India, and it's a small town in itself, but there isn't much of a city around it, right? So because there wasn't much to do outside, it formed this very deep, connected campus community, right? So people bonded really well and became really close over time. And I mean, I've been out for 4 or 5 years now, and we're still very close. The community is still really tightly knit. Um, even though I've not like really lived in India afterwards, but in the Bay Area, for instance, in Chicago, everywhere I've been, there's always this sort of cohort of IITians who are there and are part of this incredibly supportive community that formed, which I'm really thankful for.
Absolutely. Um, what do you feel is really unique about the IIT education system in your college experience, and perhaps how that might contrast for somebody who studied university in the United States? What would you feel is really unique that is that formative experience that is unique, and India has produced some of the most successful CEOs, international leaders in the private sector, in the public sector around the world, and they have had this remarkable success and penetration, especially in the Western world, in the span of only 1 to 2 generations, in fact. And no doubt the IIT system has produced many of these great leaders.
I think a lot of it is just down to technical rigor. These are very fundamentally, unapologetically engineering schools, and which does mean that you're making some trade-offs here, right? So in these schools, you don't really get a well-rounded education. You get a very narrow but specific education in fields, and so that has real trade-offs. But I think what that does is that gives you the opportunity to really go deep in certain fields. So a lot of people pursue projects. A lot of people build things in that time period. In the CS class, it was not uncommon to see people publishing research or like really, really sort of competing at global scales in various sorts of technical competitions and so on. So I think the way that the IIT programs are structured is they're very narrow, instead of being well rounded, and I think that gives people this opportunity to really, really sort of try and hone that craft or whatever part of it they're really interested in.
That's a really great way of putting it. That's definitely very different from especially the liberal arts whole education that a lot of the United States education system has. And clearly, every model is different, it has its own benefits and trade offs. But let's dive a little bit beyond your university days. Let's go afterwards, right? You've had a remarkable success in the private sector. I believe you worked for a year at Citadel, and then you went to work for Google afterwards for, I believe, nearly 4 years or about 4 years. You know, why did you make those career, progressions, specifically focused on, kind of working, I believe, in finance, and then focusing on specifically the, technology, kind of diving into that field?
So I think I wouldn't say my job at Citadel was in finance per se. I was doing quant research and quant trading, which is, yes, like it is in a hedge fund, and it is, ultimately related to a hedge fund. Like it's ultimately related to the same idea of, picking stocks and making trades and all of that. But the mechanism with which we do it is not related to the fundamentals of the business in the group that I was in. But it was related to essentially finding um, signals that can produce alpha, that can produce outsized returns, um, through very creative applications of technology, and particularly very creative applications of AI systems. So it was ultimately a very tech heavy role. There was a lot of algorithm design. There was a lot of sort of finding these hacks at the edges of the world, essentially finding out where you through the use of technology can find something about how uh, markets are correlated, or how different businesses behave in different circumstances and situations um, before the market at large, or before it can be priced in, or before other people. And that's a very exciting experience. It's a hard job where you're always sort of chasing new signals, and you're trying to develop new algorithms. Nothing really lasts. So once you build an algorithm, there's only a matter of time, after which it's going to start to lose performance and degrade. So it was that continuous process in a highly, highly, highly competitive environment, uh, but still very, very tech heavy. And I really, really enjoyed that. I think that was an incredible experience. I learned a lot. Um, and this is a very different environment from cultural perspectives versus like a big tech company like Google. So definitely trade-offs there, but it was an exciting time. Um, then I moved to Google, and then in that I did again AI model and infrastructure and system development for. I worked on the Nest thermostat, Google Home, and then Google Maps, which we did a lot of adversarial ML models, built a lot of infrastructure systems to really sort of support launching new machine learning models in a way that all of Google Maps can be served. Right, so there's a big, big effort in terms of scalability and automation. And then I moved into product management at Google Ads, where I led, built out like a small startup within an incubator sort of a structure in Google Ads, where we sort of took this idea, tried a lot of products, went from like zero to one. One of the things that worked, pivoted from a lot of others that did not, and then eventually ended up launching that in ads, which is pretty exciting.
It's fantastic. And, a lot of people, are in the tech industry is really hurting nowadays.
Yeah.
We're going through one of these down cycles. But you've worked at Google for 4 whole years, I believe, and that's especially for, I think, younger generations, millennials and Gen Zs. A lot of people in our generation don't typically do the whole lifelong career where they're there at a company for 20, 30, 40 years even before they retire. So, but in that time frame, 4 years is quite a long time. What do you feel is unique about the culture and the experience at Google that really drew you to see a career for such a long time.
Definitely. So I think is definitely 4 years is not really comparable to like a full fledged 20, 30 year career. But that said, I think what really got me to stay was, and with the caveats, I was a 2+2 admit to HBS, which meant that that was like a sort of definitive end date to my time there. But the big thing that got me to stay was just the breadth of opportunity. Right, I was able to change teams. I was able to change roles. Really, sort of experience so many different parts of the company and sort of learn and flex very different kinds of skills in that process. So in some cases, it was very hands-on, technical. In some cases, it was more about team leadership. In some cases, it was about setting a product roadmap and setting strategy. So the range of skills that this allowed me to, sort of practice and learn was a very big factor. I never felt like, okay, I don't see a future at this company because I don't know what next, right? I feel like I'm plateauing out because there was always an opportunity to say, hey, at this team, I think I've maxed out what I could get, or at this team, I think I've, learned what I could in this time frame, and now it feels like things are plateauing out. I can just change teams. So Google, and I think big tech more generally, has built this culture of incredible internal mobility, where they like not just allow but sort of almost encourage you to keep um, trying new roles and keep sort of expanding your skill set and your horizons, which is a pretty good tool to keep people there.
Absolutely. But you've had a great career there, and then you opted, of course, you knew from the 2+2 program that you were going to go study at HBS. And of course, for those that don't know, the 2+2 program means that you apply typically during the senior year of your undergraduate university, and should you be accepted, you are able to then work for 2 to 4 years, and then at which point you would then start the MBA program at Harvard. Since you already knew going in, you know, you clearly knew that you wanted to work for a number of years before, but why did you feel when you were in that you went undergraduate senior year time frame? Why did you feel you believed an MBA was a degree worth pursuing? Why was that specifically like in the plans for you at that point in time?
Yeah. So, straight out of college, right, in my last year, I applied to two different programs, had the privilege of getting into both, and then picking. And then at that point, I wasn't like, oh, I want to go to business school or I want to do an MBA. That was like, this is insurance. So the mindset that I applied with was not that, okay, I'm committed to this idea of going to get an MBA, but I would love to have that option to be able to take some risks in this time period and to be able to sort of try out different things without having the stress of, oh, what happens if my career doesn't work out as planned, or if something goes poorly and things like that. So for me, this was mostly insurance, that to allow for a little more risk taking in my career than what I normally might have been comfortable with. um, when it actually came time to like decide whether I actually want to go or not,
Mm.
and it sort of became a use it or lose it kind of situation with
Yeah.
HBS. I spoke to a lot of people because I was very unsure. I wasn't particularly if you're coming from tech, the uh, perceived career advantages are limited, right? So if you want, like I was already doing product management, a lot of people who come in or go to tech go to the same similar PM roles. So for me, it was like, do I want to take a 2 year career break versus just stay there and like, continue to grow in the organization? Or if I just wanted to change roles, change jobs, change companies, all of that's possible without HBS involved. Um, so that really forced me to ask, why do I want to do this, right? So what is it that I really want to get through this experience? If I'm willing to like quit my job and like obviously invest the time, the effort, the cost that it takes to come to HBS. And I spoke to a lot of people who had done this. Spoke to a lot of people who were in school at the time, and what really emerged was this very common theme across all of my conversations, which is that uh, sure, the career opportunities are great. Sure, the education is valuable, but what you're really going for are the people that you meet, right? It is an incredible group of people, and the social experience of everybody being in that HBS setting and spending time together and traveling together and all of that is a very rare, unique opportunity that you won't really have again in your life. So with some degree of skepticism, I took the leap. In hindsight, though, I'm really happy about it. Like I'm super glad that I did. I think it's worked really well, much better than what I'd expected it to be. So, but yes, I think throughout this process there was a degree of like skepticism around. Okay, why am I doing this? It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. But we're very, of course, very glad you took the leap and you're
I'm
here.
glad. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. And, let's talk a little bit. We've talked a little bit about your experience so far, but, over the next year and a half of the program, what are your focuses and priorities do you believe you're going to be on? Because at the end of the day, the greatest constraint that we all have is the time in the day that we have 24 hours, 7 days a week. And often HBS students feel a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, because there's simply so much opportunities available to us. And ultimately, we have to pick. What do you feel has been or is going to be your priorities now that you've experienced HBS for the past semester, but for the next year and a half as well?
Definitely, and FOMO is very real. Like I've struggled with it for the first semester. It was a major sort of adjustment period to get settled into something like this, where you're essentially triple booked for every minute of the day. So picking out what you actually want to invest time in and where you're willing to make trade offs is a big part of I think being here. Uh, Moving forward, I think the one of the big things that I really want to focus on is building out a startup. So there's some ideas that I've been playing with, and I think that was a key theme while coming in as well. That I was excited to try and work on a startup full time and see how that goes, see where that goes. It'll be I'm grown a lot in excitement on that direction as spend more time talking to potential customers and to potential like partners and suppliers and things like that. So I'm very excited about investing much more time on that in the next year and a half, plus the summer sort of leading up to REC year. The second thing that I'm pretty excited about is really sort of deepening relationships with the people that I've spent time with here, both like MSMBA cohort, my section, people I'm meeting outside. I think again, it's crazy how quickly the first semester went away. It felt like we just got here. So I really do want to be mindful of making use of the social experience and the opportunity that HBS provides. I've always loved traveling, so I'm going to continue to do that as well. So sure, that's I think sort of the way that I'm thinking about the next year or so.
And I believe from your previous work with Green and Gene, entering into HBS, you also receive, I believe, the prestigious Goldsmith Fellowship. Can you tell us a little bit about this fellowship specifically, and what really drew you to, of course, applying for it and then receiving it?
Yeah. So the Goldsmith Fellowship is an incredibly it's a great sort of opportunity and fellowship, and I'm very thankful to be part of that. There are a few aspects to it that really drew me to it. One of the big ones was that it is this very again tightly knit community of people who have worked in um, social impact in some form, and it's actually very very varied. So, for instance, I did a nonprofit. There are people who worked in policy, who worked in government. There are people who worked for large foundations. There are people who worked for like philanthropic initiatives. So the range of people that this brings together has been really interesting, and that's facilitated some very powerful conversations around what it means to drive impact in the world today, what it means to drive impact in the sort of corporate culture that we live in, and in like the context of capitalism today, which I think have been really really rewarding. So that's been one very good part of this fellowship. The fellowship essentially is uh, provides $10,000 over the course of 2 years, plus this structured community to a group of, I believe, 15 or 16 people, roughly speaking, from HBS who come from social impact backgrounds. And so the process is that once you've been accepted to HBS, you apply. At some point, they'll tell you that the applications are open, and then you apply to the fellowship. You write about your previous experience, why you're a good fit, and so on and so forth, the usual sort of stuff. And then they get back to you on it. So that's sort of from logistics perspective. But once you do get in, I think uh, the real value of it comes from the opportunity that you have to have these conversations with such an incredible group of people, but also you have access to a lot of alumni who've both been part of the fellowship, but also alumni who are generally very active in the social impact space, which I think HBS has an incredible network of people who've graduated over the years, who've done great things, either immediately or over the course of their careers. And being able to like talk to these people and really sort of get their perspectives on where they think this space is moving, where they think the world is going, and how we're talking about like working towards operationally or investing in building solutions to some of the world's greatest problems. Um, I think that that's probably the key USP for this fellowship, and that's really what got me very excited about applying. And I'm very thankful to have gotten in.
Absolutely. And you're not only, of course, focused on the classes, you're not only, of course, focused on, for many graduate students right now, recruiting for their summer internship and eventually full time job. I believe you've also co founded, since your first nonprofit organization, Green Digi, you've co founded a second nonprofit organization, one which you're the chairman of and, of course, leading in the last few years since, and still, I believe, at HBS, I believe it's Nostos Homes, which, speaking of space, is focused specifically on providing shelter for forcibly displaced individuals. And I believe the organization currently is based in the UK. Could you tell us a little bit about why you're also doing, on top of school, on top of applying for jobs and opportunities for building a startup, you also are of course focused on this nonprofit social impact side still, and a little bit about why this organization.
Yeah, definitely. So this is sort of a spin out from Green the Gene. So at Green the Gene, by the time, I mean, so at Green the Gene, we had to wind up a lot of operations during COVID because of the funding environment. It logistically became impossible for us to have volunteers on the ground and so on. So at that point, we were focusing on three major areas, so to speak. One was helping people get safe water access. Another was around clean cook stores and food security. And the third, which we have just started working on at that point, was this idea of building sustainable emergency shelters for people who were forcibly displaced. And so this is one recognition that um, climate change is happening, and there are extreme climate events that happen, and people do get displaced, right? So now this comes down to the question of mitigation. What can we do once that happens? So that's what got us thinking about this. This was my co-founder on this, Kaushal Shetty. He studied architecture in college, and so this started off as a concept in his senior thesis. Right. So I think one fine day I walked into his room and he was working on this thesis, and it was sort of spread all over his desk and all over his room and everything. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. Let's actually build this out. So that's what got us thinking about this, and then we started to really sort of um, try and do some prototyping, try and see if there was an actual market for it. We spoke to potential donors, we spoke to potential partners. We started gaining a lot of traction. So Kaushal and I were invited. We got invited to the World Bank in Washington D.C. and we gave a presentation about this, and that also garnered a lot of traction and support. And we've still worked with quite a few experts from the bank who've been incredibly supportive in our journey. So I think once we started on that route, it felt like, okay, this is a real problem. A lot of people are affected, and we have, using the sort of networks that we've built over time in this nonprofit space and using the operational ability, the learnings, etc., that we built over time, we can actually put together a team and really start building these houses out. So it was a very real opportunity to drive impact. That got us started. There have been lots of ups and downs. It turned out to be significantly harder than any of us anticipated it to be, as is with all startups. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Why do things not work? A lot of it operationally was very complicated because we were manufacturing these houses in a part of India. We were loading them onto containers, shipping them, across the ocean, deploying them in Africa, and so on and so forth. We were operating in countries where we had to rely very heavily on partners, develop partnerships with governments, where we had to figure out how to run on ground operations and so on and so forth. So the complexities were pretty heavy. So we obviously had to learn a lot in the process and adapt and like sort of figure things out as we went along. Uh, but I think the only reason that I was able to sustain this with everything else was because we had an incredible team. So my co-founder took on a lot of the work. The team really stepped up, and everybody was super involved, super passionate about this. Uh, the way we went about building the team was really to find people who cared as deeply, right? Who really wanted to do this because this was something that they had seen happen. They'd seen, like how forcible displacement can affect communities, or they knew people, or they had experienced it. And so we uh, brought together this team, this group who was very passionate about this space, and I think that really helped sustain through all the ups and downs, and actually sort of get us to where we are.
That's wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about the specific impacts it's had in the last few years? This new spin-off nonprofit organization.
Definitely. So we've provided 500,000 nights of shelter, roughly speaking, across deployments in India and Malawi. So those are two countries where we built homes so far. We are excited about scaling that up and deepening our partnerships in both locations. Um, both these countries have incredible capacity, yet there are communities across both who are faced with a lot of disasters and a lot of displacement every year. And so there's a great opportunity to build resilience there. What we, in terms of impact, another big thing that the shelters do is they're not just providing a roof over your head, right? That's one factor, but there's a lot more that comes with it, which is the sense of security, the sense of safety, which is we've seen has a positive sort of virtuous cycle that kicks off. So there's this whole ripple effect of benefits that happen. For instance, when people have that sense of security, it's much more likely that they go out there and start re-entering the job market, right? So they try and find employment. Children start to go back to school. Health hazards and injuries reduce a lot because now you're in your sort of safe, contained space instead of being in this very overcrowded refugee camp. Diseases spread reduces a lot again. When COVID happened and that we were operating at that time, we just barely started. We saw that it's refugee camps have massive outbreaks, right? Because people are so close to each other. There's no real sense of space. You can't really isolate. None of that really exists. So these houses provided a mechanism to sort of address that and build independence. So the real value prop was that okay, can we provide this as a mechanism, not just as a roof over somebody's head, but as a way for people to really sort of use this to start rebuilding their lives after something like after a disaster that basically sort of changed everything for them.
Absolutely, and we're still recovering from COVID, and I'm sure for many families, the work that your nonprofit does has been a critical part of that experience, right? And you're having real, tangible impacts you're able to see every single day. Well, you've done a lot of really great work already since the age of 8, and you're here studying, ready to, in a year and a half, go out and do more. But let's dive into, the future for you beyond HBS. And the focus of this podcast is also on, beyond their experience here at Harvard. What have people done, or what will people aspire to do in the years and decades after? What are you passionate about ultimately? Is it an industry? Is it a problem? Is it a specific methodology or tool that you are really interested in kind of focusing your life's work on? What drives you, Madhav?
I am incredibly passionate about the climate space and have been sort of ever since I was 8. Uh, that has stuck, and I think I would, in the long term, also want to continue to be in that space in some capacity. Uh, Obviously, you never know what the future holds, but I think um, either as an operator, as a founder, or in some mechanism down the road, from maybe from an advising perspective, whatever. But I do care very deeply about the space, and I think that the way forward is we can't just depend on like policy level interventions. We can't just depend on governments taking action. Or we can't just depend on like large corporations trying to tune their emissions a little bit. The real problem around climate change can only be addressed through all of these, but also a very deep effort, commitment, and focus on technical innovation that provides actual breakthroughs that make it possible for us to really move the needle in a big way, right? So we've seen some of these breakthroughs in the past where, like solar energy went from this very sort of almost academic thing to this extremely viable, very realistic, cost effective, commercially efficient form of energy. We've seen that happen already, right? So there are lots of other technologies that a lot of people have been working on around the world, which have the potential to make that breakthrough and really move the needle. And I would be very excited to be part of that ecosystem and that journey in some context.
Absolutely. And yeah, certainly as you've already worked, more than half of your life on tech in a specific area related to, of course, the impacts of climate change, of human use, water resource use, and beyond. Diving into the climate challenge, which many students now are passionate about tackling. We face a lot of unprecedented challenges. Even now, I believe COP 28 outcome, there's been a lot of controversy with the event itself, but also, the problems of whether governments can come together to tackle changes. And the latest reports are indicating that with the current level of emissions, kind of, the energy use that were projected, that the climate change, the temperature will rise, I believe, about 2.9 degrees Celsius. And the world came together with the Paris Accords trying to limit it to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius. And it seems we're far from achieving that goal. And as millennials and Gen Zs over the next decade, 2 decades enter the workforce to taking on leadership roles within major organizations, how do you view our potential challenges, or do you think it is feasible for us to achieve that ambitious climate goals? And if not, what are the alternatives towards what we can do to mitigate the impacts of climate change?
Yeah. Um, I think it is one very ambitious, two feasible, but only with some very fundamental technical breakthroughs. Right? So at that stage, we're really talking about something like direct air capture being feasible.
Directly.
Direct air capture. So, for instance, can we literally remove carbon dioxide from the sky as a mechanism to reduce, or like literally reduce on the carbon emissions or carbon that's already been emitted in some sense, right? So I think there are these key technological breakthroughs that might become necessary for us to actually achieve that, because as you've said, right, the current trajectory is not headed towards 1.5. It's not even headed to 2. It's clearly headed to something like 3, right? So if that is the world that we are living in, we definitely need to sort of hold our governments accountable. We definitely need to expect more from the corporations that we as consumers buy from or as businesses interact with. So we definitely need all of that, but we also need to invest in the right sort of tech breakthroughs to make something that can bridge that gap possible.
And towards that is, of course, trying to reduce our natural gas and oil consumption, trying to shift to alternative energies, wind, solar, and in one area, nuclear energy is also an area that is a critical part of this energy transition. Um, Towards that end, which technologies or which breakthroughs do you think potentially has the most impact towards kind of playing a key role? And there, of course, is no one singular
Yeah.
moonshot towards solving climate change. It's going to have to be a multitude of different solutions in different industries and fields, of course. But what gives you the most hope? What technical breakthrough do you see as potentially the most feasible in the next few years or next decade that can play a big role at least? What should people be potentially interested in studying or learning more about, and potentially having a job or opportunity in such a field?
So I think there are two things that I'm excited about or curious about, but I don't have expertise in. So I don't really know how feasible that is. I don't really know if that is going to be realistic at all. Like, but if it works, is incredibly impactful. So one of those areas is energy storage. The big problem with solar is that solar capacity and or all sorts of renewable, not just solar, but like solar particularly because very easy to discuss, is where you have the capacity to generate electricity might not be where you want to use the electricity, right? So imagine, okay, you fill up part of like the Sahara Desert with solar panels, you generate enough electricity to power the world. How are you going to get it there? You can put oil in pipelines, you can put oil on ships, and so on and so forth, and you can ship things across.
Right.
But with energy itself, that isn't really an opportunity so far. There is storage is expensive, it's hard. Moving electricity across is hard again, so it's a big challenge. Um, and we obviously don't have grids at the like global or international levels yet. So, are there mechanisms that we can use that store that energy into easily transportable things, right? So, I think at one point there were companies who were researching putting that in like salt formats and things like that. Can like solid salts be salts, like not like so not like table salt, but like solid salts of other minerals. Can they be used as a mechanism for energy storage? So that's like one direction of research. That's not necessarily the right answer. I don't know if that's feasible, but the concept of being able to solve energy storage in a way that makes transportation possible is a massive breakthrough that really changes the dynamics of how renewables work. Another thing that I'm very excited about is decarbonizing heavy industry. So, for instance, steel production and things like that, right? Because they are very fundamentally carbon heavy. They require a lot of coal. They require very high temperatures, so on and so forth. The processes are very hard to decarbonize, and so there's a lot of research that's going into ways in which those processes themselves can be modified, or entirely new mechanisms through which you could, like go from one ore mix to another, and so on and so forth, and produce steel. Steel is an example. There are lots of these heavy industrial sort of systems that are very carbon heavy, but where these can be decarbonized to some extent through like entirely reimagining the process in which these materials are being manufactured. So a lot of very cool material science innovation is going into that. And again, I don't think we have clear winners on or even clear answers from the science yet. But again, if any of that works, the impacts are massive. So those are the two big areas that I'm excited about, but don't really have a lot of expertise in.
No, those are great insights, and perhaps some fellow students here at Harvard in business school or in the technologies or studying a master in science or engineering might perhaps be working on some of these problems even now, and maybe we'll see their work in a few years or a decade or so. Beyond school, beyond all these pursuits, what for you drives your intrinsic happiness or satisfaction? What for you is perhaps success that makes you content or is satisfied at the end of the day for you?
I think for me, at some level, success is freedom to do what I want with my time. I think that's probably the biggest piece of it without having to worry about external constraints on really any dimension, right? On, for instance, um, financially, health wise, like location, etc., etc. So I think uh, at some meta philosophical level, that is how I define or think about success. Uh, on a day to day basis, I think that manifests itself in very different ways. In some scenarios, that comes down to um, spending time with people that I really find interesting and really sort of learn a lot from. In other cases, that means spending time um, outdoors. In some cases, that manifests into traveling. And in a very, very large majority of my time, it just comes down to, all right, doing something that I am really, really passionate about. So, for instance, for many years, that's been like, right, really spending time on working on the nonprofit, working on Nostos, and really trying to see what can we do to sort of move this forward, and what can we do to move to the next step, and so on. So, I think those have been some ways in which that definition of success at a meta level sort of uh, manifests itself in my day to day.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, well, firstly, thank you so much, Madhav, for sharing both your stories here at HBS, your passions, the work that you've done so far, and I'm sure in just a few short years, the great work that you're going to be doing But thank you for your insights and really sharing your story with the audience and with myself. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, William. Loved being here. Thank you for having me.